Rome had prevailed. The legions returned, and with them came something history prefers not to describe. Picture for a moment. You are standing on a dust-choked road in the year 72 C. In the distance, a triumphal column advances toward the imperial city. Banners ripple in the wind. Armor flashes beneath the sun. Soldiers march in flawless formation. And among them, bound together by iron chains, are hundreds of women with hollow eyes. Women who already understand that death would have been mercy compared to what awaits them. This is an account of what followed Roman conquest, of what happened when the legions took a city, of the fate reserved for female prisoners of war, of practices that transformed military victory into something far darker than territorial control. What you are about to hear is not imagination. It is preserved in commanders' letters, in the writings of imperial historians, in legal proceedings that have survived nearly 2,000 years, and yet it has been carefully excluded from classrooms and major cinematic portrayals, because some truths are too unsettling to teach openly. Before we descend further into this history deliberately forgotten, support Sinister Empires, a channel dedicated to exposing the past as it truly was. Subscribe and leave a like. It is a small gesture, but it allows these buried stories to be told. We are taught about Rome's glory, about invincible legions that conquered the known world, about victorious generals returning home along the Via Sacra, crowds erupting in celebration, about prisoners of war displayed as living proof of imperial dominance. The official story is clean and orderly. The captives became slaves. They were sent to mines, to farms, to the households of wealthy elites. A brutal fate, certainly, but presented as a normal consequence of ancient warfare. This is a version that endures. But surviving documents tell another story. According to a military report preserved in the Alexandrian archive, dating to the reign of Emperor Hadrian after the Roman conquest of Dacia in 108 C, approximately 14,000 women were taken captive. The official record mentions only their distribution among the legions and their subsequent transfer to provinces. Distribution, a word so administrative, so bloodless, until personal accounts are read, letters written home, private diaries uncovered in abandoned frontier forts, notes never intended for history. Then that word begins to mean something else entirely. Because what happened to these women before they ever became household slaves was a ritual of systematic humiliation, a celebration of victory carved into the bodies of the defeated, a political act disguised as battlefield custom. But can it even be called brutality when it was calculated, organized, and sanctioned by the Roman state itself? When a city fell, there was a sequence, not chaos, procedure. First, men of fighting age were separated. Some were executed immediately. Others were spared for the arenas. Children and the elderly were deemed useless, abandoned, expelled, or eliminated depending on logistical need. Then came the women. Young women formed the third category. They were treated differently. They were assembled in the central square of the conquered city, stripped and exposed beneath the sun and the gaze of the entire legion. They remained there for hours, sometimes days, while officers conducted selections. The most physically attractive were marked with red pigment on the left shoulder and set aside for commanders. The remainder were allocated to rank-and-file soldiers. There was even a formal Latin designation for this process: Praeta Bella Feminarum, female war spoils. The term appears in military manuals, in official correspondence. Yes, taxes were levied on this property. A fragment of a letter discovered near Herculaneum, written by a legionary named Lucius Vero during the campaign in Upper Germania, describes the scene with chilling detachment. I took 3 for myself on the first night. The youngest cried without stopping. The second tried to bite. The third stared at nothing, as if she were already gone. I preferred the third. She was easier. That word, easier, echoes across centuries, because it reveals something essential about this violence. It was not driven by desire alone. It was about domination, about erasing dignity before erasing identity, about converting human beings into objects before formally enslaving them. Roman commanders understood the political purpose of this ritual with absolute clarity. This was not about relieving soldiers after long campaigns. It was a demonstration of total power, a message delivered without ambiguity. This is what happens to your daughters, your sisters, your wives. And the message worked. The imperial historian Cornelius Tacerinus later wrote of the uprising led by Budara in northern Britannia in 61 C. He records that Budara herself and her daughters were publicly violated by Roman officers after their capture, not as personal punishment, but as a calculated display meant to establish imperial authority. The warrior queen who dared defy Rome was reduced to spectacle. Her daughters, noble by birth, were transformed into instruments of instruction. When Budara later rallied her forces again, she was not fighting merely for land. She fought for something far older and far more visceral, for vengeance that could never truly be satisfied, for dignity that could never be restored, for screams forced into silence. She was defeated, and what became of the women of her people after the final suppression was never fully recorded. We know only this. Britannia did not rebel again for nearly 3 centuries. Is silence always evidence of peace? Or is it sometimes a result of terror so complete that even speech is taken away? But this was only the beginning. After the first days, after the ritual domination, came the bureaucratic phase, the conversion of people into property. This was the next stage. The survivors were branded, hot irons pressed into flesh, burning symbols that identified the legion that captured them and the campaign in which they were taken. Marks of ownership carved into skin, often on the face, so their condition could never be concealed. Then came transport, chained together in groups of 10 or 20. They were forced to march hundreds of kilometers toward the ports. There they waited in dark, damp warehouses, the same structures used to store grain and olive oil until enough ships were available. A commercial inventory preserved in Neapolis, dated to 117 CE, records a mixed cargo of a merchant vessel, 360 amphorae of wine, 130 barrels of wheat, 92 women from Judea, 16 Numidian horses, women listed beside wine and livestock, same ledger, same accounting column, same logistical value. The sea crossing lasted weeks. They were kept below deck, chained in rows with barely enough space to sit upright, no room to lie down. Daily rations were calculated precisely, enough to keep them alive, nothing more. Many died during the journey, disease, dehydration, or simple surrender. The bodies were thrown into the sea without ritual or record. An economic calculation preserved in a Roman treatise on estate management written in the 1st century by Gaius Calvus estimated that an acceptable loss rate during transport of female war captives was between 20 and 30%. Acceptable, as though discussing spoil produce. When they finally arrived in Rome or other major cities of the empire, the next phase began. The auctions, specialized markets where wealthy buyers inspected human merchandise as one would inspect livestock, hands probing flesh, teeth examined, mouths forced open, signs of illness, injury, or pregnancy carefully assessed. The youngest and most physically desirable commanded enormous prices. They were purchased by patricians, by elite brothels, by temples offering specialized services to devotees of Eastern cults. The rest, the women whose appearance had deteriorated during the journey, those marked by scars, those who resisted, those who had broken, were sold in bulk. Mines, farms, workshops. In those places, life expectancy rarely exceeded 5 years. But there was a fate considered worse than the mines. The brothel, specialized establishments operating openly in every Roman city, legal, regulated, taxed. The Roman state profited from every transaction, and female prisoners of war were the most sought-after commodity. Why? Because they were foreign, because they came from defeated peoples, because violating the daughter of an enemy offered ordinary Roman citizens a sense of participation in imperial conquest. A man who had never carried a shield or drawn a sword could, for a few coins, feel like a victor, a conqueror by proxy. A piece of graffiti found in Herculaneum, scratched onto the wall of a brothel, reads simply, "Here I entered a woman of Britannia. Rome is eternal." Even the most intimate act was transformed into a political statement. The women in these places had no names. They were identified only by origin. The Gaul, the German, the Judean. They worked in cubicles smaller than 2 square meters. No windows. A single curtain as a door. They serviced between 10 and 20 men per day. There was no retirement, no release, no exit. Many turned to suicide. Others lost their sanity completely. A very small number survived long enough to be freed. But even freedom did not erase what had been done. The brand on the face remained. The memory in the body remained. In the 2nd century, a Roman physician named Serenus of Pergamon wrote a medical treatise. One chapter addressed illnesses common among women used in war prostitution. He described chronic inflammation, premature infertility, recurring hemorrhages. Then he added, almost as a passing note, that brothel owners were advised to renew their stock every 3 to 4 years, as after that period the merchandise lost commercial value and productive capacity. Renew the stock, as one might replace cracked amphory. And all of this entire industrial system of dehumanization, functioned openly. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was denied. There was no shame. It was simply considered the natural order of things, the logical outcome of victory. Rome had won, and the defeated paid with everything they were, and everything they might have become. The question lingers. How much of this calculated coldness survives in modern wars, merely under different names? Behind the wall of historical silence lies something even darker. There are almost no first-person accounts. The victims themselves left no written testimony. They could not write the language of their conquerors. They had no access to materials. And even if they had, who will preserve their words? Yet there are rare exceptions, disturbing ones. In the 2nd century, a woman named Valentia appears in early Christian writings. She had been enslaved after a campaign in Transalpine Gaul. While serving in a Roman household, she converted to the new faith. When this was discovered, she was arrested. During interrogation, she spoke about her past. One surviving fragment records her words. They asked if I feared death. I told them I had already died many times. They killed me the night my village burned. They killed me on the march to the sea. They killed me in the ship's hold. They killed me the first time a Roman man called me property. Death before the beast would only confirm what was already true. Valentia was executed in the arena, but her words endured. They reveal something essential. The trauma was not only physical, it was existential. The destruction was not merely of the body, but of the very idea of being human. These women were forced to learn a terrible truth, that dignity, identity, and human worth are not fixed. They are conventions, revocable in an instant. As long as Rome prevailed, that convention held. When Rome conquered, it ended, and once broken, it could never be rebuilt, even when freed, even when escaped, even decades later. The fracture remained, because the revelation could not be unlearned. You are human only as long as someone stronger allows you to be. Another document from the 2nd century records a rebellion of enslaved women in a rural estate in Hispania Tarraconensis. They killed the owner and his household in the middle of the night. When they were captured, the leader, a Germanic woman identified in the records only as the copper-haired one, was brought before a magistrate prior to execution. She spoke once. "You taught us that the world belongs to the violent," she said. "We only practice a lesson." She was crucified alongside 17 others, but the sentence endured because it exposed the central hypocrisy of the entire system. Rome saw itself as civilization. It believed it brought order, law, and structure to a barbaric world, that it replaced chaos with discipline. that it elevated humanity through conquest, but that civilization was constructed on systematic violence, on the calculated exploitation of the bodies and inner lives of the defeated. And when the defeated turned that same logic of violence back upon Rome, they were no longer participants in the natural order. They were criminals. A Roman historian writing centuries later recorded a moment that quietly revealed this contradiction. Ammianus Severinus, writing in the 5th century, described events during the northern invasions that would help fracture the empire itself. He noted something unsettling. Some Roman women taken captive appeared strangely resigned to their fate, not hysterical, not defiant, resigned, as if they recognized in what was happening to them a distant echo of something their own ancestors had once inflicted upon others. History folding inward on itself, Rome harvesting what it had sown across centuries of conquest. But this recognition redeemed no one. It did not spare those women. It did not lessen the suffering awaiting them. It merely revealed a nauseating truth. Human beings possess an almost limitless capacity to turn the pain of others into systems, into traditions, into routines, into something that feels normal. And when one system collapses, another is already waiting beneath it. The machinery changes hands. The logic remains. So the question emerges, have we truly evolved? Or have we merely changed the clothing of the same cruelty? History books rarely devote more than a paragraph to the fate of prisoners of war in antiquity. And when women are mentioned at all, the language becomes deliberately vague, enslaved, exploited, words that soften what was systematic destruction. That careful silence exists for a reason. As the Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg once observed, the boundary between the sacred and profane is thin, and almost always drawn by power. Rome became the civilizational template for the Western world. Its legal structures shaped modern law. Its military organization informed contemporary armies. Its architecture still rises in capitals across the globe. To fully confront the systematic nature of Roman sexual violence would require questioning the foundations of this admiration. It would require acknowledging that civilization carries a cost, and that this cost is almost always paid by the most vulnerable. So instead, we choose elegance. We choose silence. We focus on aqueducts, on roads, on law codes. We celebrate Julius Caesar as a brilliant military mind, while quietly ignoring that his campaigns in Gaul resulted in the enslavement of hundreds of thousands of women and children. We watch films in which gladiators fight heroically for freedom, yet we never see what existed just beyond the arena walls. We never see the brothel beside the Colosseum. We never see the lines of men waiting their turn with newly arrived captives, because that would be uncomfortable, and discomfort is precisely what history demands. There's a tombstone in a museum in London, dated to the 2nd century. It was found near what was once a Roman fort in Britain. The inscription is brief. Here once was a woman, her name forgotten, her homeland forgotten. May the gods show her more mercy than Rome did. No name, no story, only an anonymous acknowledgement of suffering too heavy to describe. How many others were there? Millions. Across 6 centuries of imperial expansion, countless women passed through the same cycle. Born free, captured, violated, enslaved, erased, their lives reduced to figures in military reports, numbers in commercial inventories, footnotes in history books most people never open. But every statistic was a complete human life, a girl with a name, with parents, with hopes, a woman who loved and was loved, a full human being reduced to an object by men who believed victory granted them that right. This was not a single night of uncontrolled rage. It was methodical, repeated, normalized. It was not a failure of civilization. It was civilization functioning exactly as designed. As one anthropologist would later argue, war is not the breakdown of order. It is its foundation. Every state is born from the ability to organize violence at scale. Rome proves the argument. These horrors were not produced by chaos. They were produced by perfect order. The machine operated smoothly. Soldiers did their duty. Merchants conducted business. Citizens frequented licensed establishments and paid their taxes. Everything was legal. Everything was justified. Everything was considered natural. How many modern systems speak in the same language? How many present-day cruelties are defended by necessity, by security, by order? The weeping of millions of women whose names were never carved into stone still lingers beneath the ruins. They built Rome as much as its engineers and generals did. They built it with their bodies, with their lives, with everything they were and everything they might have been. A poet once wrote that the people of the past were no worse than us, that they simply did not know what we would later discover. But did they truly not know? Or did they know perfectly well and simply choose not to care? The records existed. The documents survived. Anyone who wanted to know could know. The Romans documented everything with meticulous bureaucracy. The issue was never ignorance. It was complicity. And when we choose today to celebrate Rome's greatness without acknowledging its foundations of suffering, when we teach young people about the glory of the legions without explaining what followed victory, when we watch stories of emperors and gladiators and conveniently forget the rest, do we not become complicit as well? Do we not continue the silence that began 2,000 years ago? The truth is uncomfortable. We prefer comforting myths to disturbing realities. We prefer simple heroes to the recognition that almost all human greatness is purchased at an obscene price. We prefer to believe that those times were different, that we have progressed, that we would never do the same. But we do, in different forms, under different justifications, in different places. Sexual exploitation in war zones did not end with Rome. The conversion of human beings into marketable objects did not end with Rome. Systematic violence against the defeated, the displaced, the refugee did not end with Rome. It only changed its language. And as long as we look to the past only to admire its achievements, while refusing to confront its horrors, the cycle continues. As long as we study history only for the lessons that comfort us, never as a warning that demands restraint, we are not learning at all. We are rehearsing. So ask yourself this: have these horrors truly remained in the past? Or have we simply learned to conceal them more skillfully, to justify them with refined language, to bury them inside systems so vast and intricate that no single person feels responsible? Is the difference between us and the empires of old truly moral? Or is it merely technological? And when you close your eyes at night, when the world grows quiet and only your conscience remains, can you hear the echo? Or have you learned, like countless generations before you, to turn screams into whispers so faint they blend into the wind? Power, in every era, discovers a way to sanctify its own sins. It builds altars from necessity, from order, from progress, and demands reverence in return. The final question is simple. Will you continue kneeling at that altar,